Welcome back to our channel. I'm Velden-Duffey, and with me today I have Elmarie Richter. We're going to discuss surrogacy in South Africa. Elmarie, let's start with the basic question. What is surrogacy?
Yes, Velden, I don't think it's something that a lot of people know of. So surrogacy is when you find another mom or woman to basically carry your child. So a mom and a dad who's unable to have children of their own, they can then, I want to use the word employ, but for a lack of better terms, but they can then ask someone to act as their surrogacy. And that woman will only carry the child. So the gametes, like the sperm and the egg, will then be artificially implanted into the surrogate mom. She will carry the baby, she will deliver the baby, and then the mom and dad, who we call the commissioning parents, they will then become the parents of the child. So the surrogacy or the surrogate mother is someone who carries a child on behalf of someone who's unable to do so themselves.
Okay, so can my husband and I just decide, oh, you know what, I don't feel like getting pregnant?
No, unfortunately not. It would have been nice, but no. There must be a medical reason why a woman cannot carry her own baby and why you have to make use of someone else's body to carry the baby on your behalf. For example, if let's say there's a mom and a dad and there's only an issue with the dad, then obviously a surrogate mother is not needed here because you can get a sperm donor. But let's say the mom is unable to carry the baby, like a uterus issue or something of that sort, then a surrogate can be approached to then carry the baby on her behalf. Oftentimes we see it when where there's one parent, one commissioning parent, whose gametes are used for surrogacy, and oftentimes we see that both parents' gametes are used for surrogacy, because there is some instances where a woman can or have eggs to be fertilized, but she cannot carry the baby herself.
Yes.
But like I said, there must be medical reasons and supported by doctors' opinions, of course, in order to then approach a surrogate and then to proceed with the surrogacy. Also important is you have to bring a high court application before you can be a surrogate mom or before you can make use of a surrogate mom.
Okay, I was just wanting to inquire whether or not anybody from the street can just say, listen, here I am, I need some money, I'll be a surrogate for you.
Yeah.
What is the process? How does it work?
Usually that's how people meet their surrogate, is by way of meeting someone in town or someone who knows someone else. But at the end of the day, there's quite a legal procedure that you have to follow. And for example, you have to get advice of lawyers, and they will then draft the court papers on your behalf. It's a high court application where you have to get the court's consent to proceed with the surrogacy.
Oh, that's interesting.
And only after that court order that says, yes, you have my stamp of approval, you can proceed, only then can the fertilization of the eggs, etc., continue or commence.
Yeah.
So, but there's quite a few interesting facts and rules and regulations in respect of surrogacy that I would like to share with you. So, for example, you cannot be a surrogate mom if you do not have a kid of your own.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah. So I cannot say, well, Dad, I will carry your child on your behalf if I don't have a child of my own that I'm raising. That's a requirement. I need a child of my own. And to a certain extent, it makes sense.
Yes,
you know, there is an emotional bond and type of thing. Carrying a baby 9 months is not nothing. So they want to be sure that you have a child of your own. So obviously, with having a child of your own, you need proof of a viable pregnancy and delivery of a baby as well.
Quite interesting.
And then consent. Consent is very important.
Whose consent is needed?
So not only the surrogate mom and the commissioning parents, also the consent of their spouses. So let's say I want to be a surrogate mom. My husband must consent and agree to the fact that I'm making myself available to be a surrogate mom.
Okay.
And if you want a baby and we are going to use your egg and implant it into my body and I'm going to be the surrogate, your husband must also consent to the surrogacy agreement. So the consent is quite important here as well. Then the agreement must be in writing. It cannot only be something, an oral agreement, for example. It must be in writing.
So which act deals with this?
This is the Children's Act
Okay,
that deals with this surrogacy. Mostly the Children's Act deals with it because a child will be born from a woman's body, but she's not going to be the parent.
Okay.
So the Children's Act go into quite in depth with regards to who's going to be the parent, who's going to have the parental rights and responsibilities, because that's also very important and worth mentioning is that, you know, if a child's born from a surrogate mom, that child cannot go and claim maintenance from the surrogate mom.
Okay.
And the surrogate mom, on the other hand, cannot approach a court to have contact with that child. There's no rights flowing from the surrogacy.
Oh, that's
so
interesting.
Once
it
the
also
child
makes sense.
It does, yes. And once the child's born, that is the child of the gamete donors. You know?
So what happens in a situation where the child is born, but the surrogate mother does not want to hand the child over?
So, well, there you have the protection of the agreement that you sign and the court order that was granted before the surrogacy actually took place. So, if I understand the rules and regulations of the court correctly, the court will take the child away from the surrogate mom and give it to the parents who's deemed to be the parents in terms of the act and in terms of the agreement.
Sure, that can be quite traumatizing. So I understand why there's so many rules and regulations regarding this. And then tell me as well, can I, for instance, offer myself, if I've had a previous pregnancy and comply with all of the other obligations or rules, can I offer myself for payment like you would in donating an egg or?
No. The Children's Act also quite clear on this portion as well. You cannot receive compensation for carrying the child. Yes, expenses can be covered on the mom's behalf. For example, let's say she's away from work because she's carrying the child. Maybe there's difficulty with the pregnancy and she's away from work for quite some time and there's loss of earnings.
Okay.
That can be paid. Or she can be reimbursed for that loss of earnings. Or her medical expenses can be paid. The expenses in respect of the artificial fertilization or the implant of the egg or the medical expenses in respect of the delivery of the baby.
That makes sense as well.
All that expenses can be covered.
So
but she cannot receive
for a profit.
No, she cannot receive a portion of cash or a house or whatever in exchange for being the surrogate
I
mother.
imagine if that was the case, there would be many more situations like this. Tell me more or less, how often do we deal with surrogacy in our country?
Well, it is something that often occurs, but like I said, not a lot of people will know about it. I think only people will have this knowledge that actually they've been through the process or they've looked into the process. So it's something that happens actually quite regularly. Same with sperm and egg donations. It's something that often happens. We just live in, I want to say, like a viewpoint where we don't necessarily know what's going on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and tell me, you mentioned now if the surrogate mother is away from work, there would be that compensation. But how would maternity leave work for a surrogate mother and the commissioning mother?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, and I haven't looked into this. But what I would think from the back of my mind when we look at the basic conditions of Employment Equity Act and the Labour Relations Act and that type of things, usually when someone had a C-section, for example, they are off 6 weeks.
Okay.
So I would say that the surrogate mom should be entitled to 6 weeks. I can, however, not confirm. This is something that we can look into and maybe do a follow-up podcast or something of that sort. And same with, parents who's adopting a child. They also get paternity and maternity leave.
Yes.
And this will also apply then in circumstances with a surrogate mom.
Okay.
You don't necessarily need the time off recovering physically, but you have a baby and you have someone to take care of. And I think it's the basic conditions of Employment Equity Act, and they make provision for that type of family responsibility leave and the maternity leave in respect thereof. So there will definitely be leave. I can just not unfortunately confirm what amount of leave or how many months.
But it would be in the same it would be more or less the same than it would be for a mother adopting a child.
Yeah, I would think so.
It would just
Yeah.
make sense. Also, tell me, what advice do you have for parents that are considering surrogacy or surrogate mothers that's considering doing that for someone else?
Well, I actually want to encourage people to consider this route and option. I think it's something that can definitely be explored and can make a lot of happy families for people who are struggling. So I do want to encourage people in considering this option. But I also want to advise that you walk that you walk with a psychologist or a counselor or someone. This whole process that you enter into, that you do it with someone who can emotionally support you as well. I think this is important for the commissioning parents and for the surrogate parents as well. And then, like I said, legal advice.
Definitely.
It's so important. You have to go and see an attorney before starting the negotiations with a surrogate parent, or before you as a possible surrogate approach someone else. It's important to obtain advice in respect of your rights, your position in law, the requirements that you need to obliged with. You know, I think that's very important.
Now, only going afterwards to see an attorney when the surrogate mother does not want to hand the child over, or even if you feel at the end of the day you no longer want that child, what would that position be? But if it's a lawful surrogacy agreement that's been approved by the court, what would the position be if I, as the surrogate or the commissioning parents, if they don't want the child and said, no, this was a mistake, we don't want him anymore?
I think this is typically one of those circumstances, and once again, this is only my opinion. I cannot fact check it now. But what I would think would happen there is there will be a court order confirming that is the parents of the child. And whenever there's parents who unfortunately don't want their children and they neglect them or they abuse them, that's when our children's homes and our social workers come and play a substantial role in the lives of the kids and their parents. So typically, you know, when we take a general matter, if a parent doesn't want a child, there's usually a type of form of neglect or emotional abuse or rejection, and that then is the typical circumstances where we notify a social worker, and any member of public can notify a social worker of that neglect and that refusal to care for a child, because they are dependent, and then the social workers will go and investigate. If the household circumstances are not on par, or there's a type of form of abuse, or like I said, a rejection, which is really a form of abuse, then the social workers can step in, they can take the child away. I must admit, though, I haven't heard of any matters where commissioning parents went through all the effort and they paid all the money and incur all the costs and they didn't want the baby. Okay. So I don't know of circumstances where it happened. Like I said, I don't think it's impossible, but I think there's different ways in dealing with it. But there's a lot of effort and a lot of planning that goes into the surrogacy agreements. There was something that I forgot to mention, if you don't mind. I just want to mention that as well. What's important with the surrogacy agreement and is that either one of the commissioning parents, their sperm or eggs must be used in the surrogate mom.
Yes,
so it cannot be.
There was a recent court case about
that. There was. It was in Nelspruit, Mbombela.
Yes.
I think that's Nelspruit. That's the High Court, where the parents, they had a child, and they were unable to have more children of their own. The mom was physically unable to carry the child, but in that specific circumstances, she was from the onset unable to use the dad's sperm and her own egg to fertilize an egg, or what do you call it, to get pregnant.
Yes.
And with that initial pregnancy, they already make use of donor sperm and donor egg, and she was like her own surrogate, basically.
Yes.
And she got a baby, but that pregnancy was very difficult. With the delivery of the baby, she lost her uterus. She was unable to carry a baby of her own. But they had sperm and eggs frozen. So there would be a genetic link between the child.
Of that same child.
Yes. Yeah. So a few years down the line, they wanted another baby, and they do have this frozen embryos, like you've mentioned, and the frozen embryos, there will be a direct link between the child they already have and the soon-to-be sibling. But unfortunately, there was no link between mom and dad and the embryo,
And that's what
because
the
it's
law
already
requires.
donations.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's one of the requirements. So in that specific circumstances, the court said, but no, listen, that's the requirement is that either mom or dad must be genetically linked to the baby that's going to be carried by a surrogate. So you cannot approach a surrogate. So the court said no, but then they really tried. They approached the court with a request that that section of the act be extended to also include genetic links between siblings, saying that it's unconstitutional to only limit it to the parents having a genetic link. But unfortunately, they were unsuccessful.
Because I think the court's reasoning would have been that they do still have other options, and that's why it's not unconstitutional towards them.
Yeah.
They can still adopt.
Exactly.
There's other legal options that they can consider.
And the court want to keep the act and the legislation focusing on a genetic link. And I also do understand that.
Yes.
It is something worth focusing on.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Tell me quickly, if the parents, the commissioning parents afterwards get divorced, how will that relationship look?
Well, it will be the same with any other divorce where children were born from a marriage relationship. But this child, even though a surrogate carried the baby and delivered the baby, the law deems this baby as a normal child born from a marital relationship.
That makes sense.
So the parental rights and responsibilities of the parties will continue to exist like in normal divorces, but they will now allocate certain responsibilities to certain parents, like the right of contact,
like with any
responsibility of care with any other divorce.
Okay, and something that we just didn't touch on, if now let's say you didn't have a lawful agreement beforehand and someone offered to be your surrogate and you went into that relationship and now that surrogate does not want to hand over the baby, what would the situation be?
That's quite a difficult position, because if you don't comply with all the requirements beforehand, there's not a valid surrogacy agreement. So actually the mom carrying the baby will be deemed to be the mother.
Okay.
And she will be deemed to have the parental rights and responsibilities. So that's then big battles in the High Court. I must admit though, the specialists working with the fertilization of the egg and the implant into the surrogate mom, etc., they always want to see this agreement before they proceed with the medical procedures, which is also good. And I think they also do it for, to make sure that there's no medical negligence claims or that type of stuff. But they also have their admin in order, if I may say so. So they will also refer you to lawyers to get the agreement beforehand.
Yeah.
Another thing, also, after the court granted the order saying this agreement's valid, you have to proceed with the surrogacy within 18 months.
Oh, that is quite interesting.
You cannot wait indefinitely. It's not like you were a surrogate mom 2 years ago, so that agreement still stands. I can call the shots whenever I want to.
Yes.
It must be executed within 18 months.
Okay, that is quite interesting. So that also gives an option of one pregnancy.
Well, it depends on how soon the pregnancy files.
Yeah.
If it files and if it succeeds, it only in any event might cater for one pregnancy.
Oh, does it?
But then there's there's enough time if she doesn't fall pregnant or the fertilization is unsuccessful, then there's more than enough time to continue and to make sure that she's fine within that 18 months. But each surrogate agreement is only for one child.
Okay, that is quite interesting. Well, thank you for being with us today and explaining all of the rules and regulations and interesting facts regarding surrogacy. I'm sure that the listeners out there will find it helpful on their journey.
Thank you. Thanks, Velden.
Okay, have a good day, listeners.